10, 9, 8. We have a go for engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
If we wanted to live among the stars, how would we do it?
About 3, 2, 1.
A Watch with the World event. Inside the space station. Join us for a journey back in time and space to see how we've gone from looking at the stars to building a space station to live among them. This 4-part video and accompanying curriculum guide introduce man's exploration of space, beginning with Galileo's invention of the telescope, then an overview of telescopes and the development of rocket technology. The first 2 segments illustrate how people have been able to explore the universe. The third segment traces the history of manned spaceflight. Segment 4 illustrates life on the space station. And now, countdown to the space station. How have people learned about the solar system? This video segment on telescopes answers that and other questions about man's early efforts to learn about space. As you watch the video, think about these questions. Why are people interested in the universe? How have telescopes helped us learn about the universe?
Ignition sequence start.
We greet the dawn of the 21st century as veteran space explorers. In the last few decades, we have launched spacecraft to study the sun, distant planets, comets, asteroids, and of course, the moon. We've come a long way since the 17th century scientist, Galileo Galilei, startled the world with a telescope that could make distant objects in space appear near. Still, with his handheld telescope magnifying objects by a power of 30, Galileo discovered Jupiter's orbiting moons and confirmed the idea that the Earth was not the center of the universe. This idea, accepted as a simple fact today, shocked the world then, and Galileo was sentenced to 9 years of house arrest for voicing it. The early 20th century found astronomers working with better tools for exploring the universe, but they were still working in the dark. Determined to find the suspected 9th planet, known today as Pluto, a young amateur astronomer, Clyde Tombaugh, spent cold nights painstakingly photographing a small section of the sky where the planet was believed to exist. He spent 7,000 hours poring over negative star images on glass plates, looking for any object moving beyond Earth's orbit. Ten months later, on February 18, 1930, Tombaugh's efforts paid off. Tombaugh noted the movement of a speck, and Pluto was found. But Pluto is seen here only as a faint point of light. To truly explore space, we have to climb above Earth's atmosphere and look beyond what our eyes can see. In the last few decades, some of the exploration of our solar system has been carried out by rocket-launched robotic spacecraft. One of the first, Voyager 1, left Earth's atmosphere over 20 years ago. The probe photographed Jupiter and Saturn, discovering new rings on each, and is currently heading beyond our solar system for discoveries in interstellar space. While we make plans for a manned mission to Mars, it's important to remember that human space travel is limited by time and, well, yes, by space. The nearest star to our sun is Proxima Centauri. In order to get there, we'd have to travel at 186,000 miles per second. That's the speed of light for 4.3 years. In the meantime, we have plans for an Origins telescope that may determine which planets in distant galaxies have atmospheres that could support life. And the existing Hubble Space Telescope tantalizes us with images of the world beyond. "100 years ago, manned flight seemed like a fool's dream, and space travel was hardly imagined.
Yes, indeed. They got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes.
Then we landed on the moon. Now, a space probe is moving into a world we didn't know existed until the early 20th century. Whether our space exploration is virtual or real, it's important to remember that the sky is no longer the limit.
Rockets have played an important role in space exploration. Without rockets, we wouldn't have space travel. While watching this segment, think about the following. Why were improvements in rocket technology so important in the 1940s? Why were improvements important in the 1960s?
And we have solid motor burnout. The solids look very good.
Breaking through gravity's stronghold, rockets carry astronauts and satellites into another world. The first rockets may have been 13th century Chinese fireworks, sent aloft with gunpowder. But modern rockets are far more complex machines. To break through Earth's atmosphere and its gravitational pull, combustible fuel thrusts rockets into the sky at 7 miles a second.
Have it to northeast above the Atlantic Ocean, parallel to the eastern seaboard of the United States.
The demand for more powerful weapons during World War II hastened the development of rocket technology. At Hitler's insistence, physicist Werner von Braun created the V2, a liquid fuel-powered rocket that shot 1-ton warheads from Germany to London. At the end of the war, von Braun fled to the US with his know-how, but the Russians flew ahead in the post-war space race. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched the world's first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, on the back of Zimyorka, a 104-foot-tall rocket launched by 4 giant liquid fuel engines. Zimyorka packed power capable of sending an atomic bomb 5,000 miles. Five weeks later, the same rocket carried a dog into space. A manned spaceflight wasn't far behind. Hurried US responses went up in flames. This Vanguard rocket exploded within seconds of launch. The Soviets followed in 1961 with the first manned flight. Yuri Gagarin rode a rocket into space and orbited the Earth. President Kennedy responded by setting his sights even further out in space.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
With the help of Werner von Braun, the U.S. built the extraordinary Saturn V rocket and landed men on the moon on July 20th, 1969. The three-stage Saturn towered 363 feet in the air. Its first launch registered at an earthquake monitoring station 1,000 miles away. Powerful descendants of the Saturn V took the space shuttle into orbit just 20 years after Yuri Gagarin's historic flight. In fact, the space shuttle is powered by the mightiest rockets ever built. Twin solid rocket boosters create the shuttle's initial lift.
Good solid rocket booster separation.
2 minutes into flight, 3 liquid fuel engines take over, blasting the shuttle into orbit. But as we land in the 21st century, even the shuttle's engines look dated. Test rockets like the Venture Star promise greater efficiency. And some new rocket designs don't run on fuel at all. Ion drives produce an electric field that may create enough energy to propel us in space for a year or more. Tomorrow's rockets and their missions are limited only by our imagination.
Manned spaceflight was the ultimate goal in the space race. After watching this segment that traces the history of manned spaceflight, be prepared to discuss the following questions. Why was reaching the moon so important to the United States in the 1960s? Why are countries now working together in space?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
The American obsession with space began in 1957 with the news that the Soviet Union, the United States' Cold War foe, had successfully launched a satellite into orbit. The space race was on.
At an altitude of 560 miles, at an estimated speed of 18,000 miles an hour, the first man-made satellite is orbiting through the heavens, sent there yesterday by Soviet Russia.
In 1961, the Soviets stunned the world again when they launched the first human being into space. About his trailblazing single orbit of the Earth, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin said, "I looked and looked and looked, but I didn't see God." The Soviets may not have found God. They did find glory. A few weeks later, the United States successfully managed to launch astronaut Alan Shepard on a suborbital fleas jump, as the Soviets called it. Shepard's 15-minute flight was technically into space, but just barely.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained.
President Kennedy became determined that the United States would be the first to land an astronaut on the moon.
For the progress of all.
Kennedy didn't live to see his dream fulfilled. When Apollo 11 reached the moon in 1969, American astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first human beings to step foot on another celestial body.
To realize that you've been blessed to do what very few people can do, you just pinch yourself and say, well, how lucky can I be to have done this? It's the highlight of a life because unless you're going to hide, you can't remove the fact that people are going to look at you differently.
Since those pioneering steps of Aldrin and Armstrong, only 10 other people have been on the moon, and fewer than 400 have journeyed into space.
You got the flag up now, and you can see the...
Do you have the right stuff?
See if you can answer this question about space. True or false? On another planet, you would be the same age as you are now. Got it? Did you figure it out yet? The answer is false. Different planets take different amounts of time to go around the sun, so the years are different. If you lived on Mars, you would be about half as many years old as you are now. If you lived on Mercury, you'd already be driving. To find out more about space, tune in to Discovery Kids on December 10th from 9 to noon, when we launch 2 teams of kids into an outer-worldly adventure. Find out all about the life of an astronaut.
Are you mission ready?
Discovery Kids, explore your world and beyond.
10, 9, 8. We have a go for engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is it like living in space? How do astronauts work in a place that has no gravity? Watch this segment from inside the space station and think about these questions. How do astronauts prepare food? How do they eat and brush their teeth?
By the year 2005, the International Space Station will grow to be 5 times larger than Mir and accommodate a crew of 7 astronauts. With its enormous solar arrays unfurled, it will be as large as 2 football fields. It will take 160 spacewalks to build this orbiting skyscraper. The NASA astronaut with the most experience doing this is 52-year-old Jerry Ross. He's logged over 44 hours of assembly work in space.
I need a handrail, number 120, I think.
It's very hard to describe what it's like to go outside in your own little spaceship, your spacesuit, and go out there and do things that you've been preparing to do for months, if not years in advance, is an incredible experience. For an engineer to think these kinds of things is kind of strange, but I really felt like I was at unity with the universe. I felt like I was out there doing exactly what God had designed me to do. What a tremendous feeling that is.
Nope, that's yet to live.
On their spacewalks, astronauts install handrails to help them move around the outside of the modules. They wire electrical equipment, deploy communication antennas, position tools, assemble and operate cranes to move large hardware, and they attach mountings for future modules and other equipment. In all, it will take 1,900 man-hours to assemble the space station, which means if they work non-stop, it would take 3 months solid, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
In a way, it's like trying to build a ship in the middle of the ocean in a storm, having many different countries providing pieces and hardware and personnel, and having all this done in an environment that is really hostile to life and to equipment in general.
Space is a hazardous place to work. Without an atmosphere, the radiant energy of the sun causes dramatic temperature changes to the astronauts and the equipment they use.
In the shadow of the space station, you might be working with tools that are minus 100 or 120 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. On the hot side, in the sun, you might come into contact with things that are 250 degrees above Fahrenheit. And above that, you'd start to melt the spacesuit glove, and that's something we'd like to avoid as well.
The temperature difference between these two astronauts working side by side could be as high as 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Their $12 million spacesuits protect them from these extremes. But working outside the rapidly orbiting station still poses certain dangers.
Living in zero gravity, you become fully adapted where flying is normal. Letting go of something and have it float there is normal. Having to strap down with a bungee cord every item, your toothbrush, your comb, your toothpaste, the cap to the toothpaste, all the pieces of a scientific experiment, that becomes normal.
50 feet at 245.
What seems abnormal is when you come back to gravity. That is hard.
We're down. Oh, man, what a landing.
I, in my case, lost 12 or 13% of the bone mineral in my pelvis due to the lack of loading.
Without gravity to put a load on our muscles and bones, they can simply dissolve away. If humans are to survive in space, how are we to overcome the limitations of our own bodies? The Russians have a long history in space station technology. Living and working aboard Mir provided valuable information for designing the International Space Station.
We're in the Crystal module now. I feel like I'm exploring a cave.
The Mir was cramped and stuffy, with temperatures ranging up to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. But certain features, such as porthole windows for a view of the stars in each member's crew quarters, made life tolerable.
Now you can see Node up there, an inviting place, kind of warm colors.
By contrast, life aboard the International Space Station is roomy and bright.
It's just an absolutely super place. Look at the volume Sergei is floating around in.
The temperature is maintained at a comfortable 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is scary. What is scary?
Much of our day-to-day living in space is surprisingly the same as on Earth, with the exception of being anchored while sleeping to keep from floating away. Without gravity, water forms into suspended bubbles, making personal hygiene a challenge. Using the bathroom requires restraints to hold the astronaut in place, a suction system to collect the waste, and a tube and funnel for urination. On the space station, even brushing your teeth is an adventure.
The little things sometimes become really big events, like just changing clothes in space without gravity. You know, putting on your socks is a big event. You know, just getting them out of a locker might be a big deal because you got to hold on to a wall or to a bulkhead to open the locker door. You just can't pull on it.
Food is better than ever. For the first time, astronauts have a refrigerator and microwave ovens. Along with the usual dehydrated fare, astronauts can enjoy fruits and vegetables, cereal, and cold milk.
We broke out the drinks and some food. Jim's having some strawberries. Sergei's already into his dessert, got a big brownie there. And everybody is well hydrating.
Adequate rest and meals are important for astronauts because most of their time in the station is spent hard at work. Their exhaustive schedule includes maintenance tasks and installation of new hardware, the packing and storage of supplies and equipment, and a whole range of scientific experiments both inside and outside the space station. Assembling these giant modules in orbit call for skills most astronauts have yet to acquire. How do we practice for such an undertaking? For those who build the station, the rehearsal for outer space begins in inner space. This is the NBL, NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Lab. Containing 6.4 million gallons of water, this enormous pool covers 20,000 square feet and is 4 stories deep. Working underwater, the weightless experience on orbit is closely duplicated. training on these full-size mock-ups, astronauts are able to perform their complex assembly duties many times over before ever attempting them in space. To achieve neutral buoyancy for the effect of weightlessness, astronaut suits are balanced with lead weights and blocks of styrofoam until they neither sink nor float. Overlooking the tank, supervisors in a control room monitor the activities below on video. Cameras record every angle as the astronauts run through a carefully prepared script that details all aspects of the underwater spacewalk.
So this is on the zenith side.
That's correct.
Okay.
It really is the only place on Earth that we can really choreograph the details that we're going to need to do up on orbit. We're going through the very precise tether swaps and how we're going to hand off tools and make connectors. It's a very difficult choreography.
Continue the roll another 45 degrees or so.
Still moving. Report now.
For every single hour an astronaut spends walking in space, he'll typically train for 10 hours underwater.
Very seldom is it a huge thing that makes the mission not work. It's some little detail that we overlook. So the excruciating detail we go to try and make sure that everything is as realistic in our minds as possible and in the mock-ups as possible, so that when we get to space, it'll feel familiar and easy as if we've been doing it our whole lives.
The intensive training that astronauts receive prepares them to handle any task on orbit or any crisis getting there. More than 45 launches are needed to build the International Space Station. The crews for these missions all share a common spirit for adventure and a passion for the work that they do.
And we do have live TV from the suit-up room. Our mission commander, Bob Cabana, is making his 4th trip into space.
51-year-old astronaut Bob Cabana has logged over 1,000 hours in space, including the first mission to build the International Space Station.
How's everybody doing?
I just wanted to fly airplanes when I was young. I always had this desire to fly. You know, I could never get rid of it. When I'm looking at this spaceship there on a pad, it's fueled and it's venting and it's creaking and it's like it's alive. And you say, I can't believe in 3.5 hours I'm going to be inside there taking off into space.
MTD, you're clear to launch. Have a great mission. Thank you very much.
I mean, those main engines crank up, and the whole orbiter kind of moves forward from it, and then back, and then when it hits the vertical, the solid's like. It's shaking and vibrating, and you're trying to read the gauges, and you're being pushed back in your seat. And you just remember this sense of speed. It's just a sense of acceleration.
Throttle up. Roger, Houston, go at throttle.
There's a bang and a flash, and you see the solids fall away. And then you're just on those 3 main engines, better than 1/3 of a million pounds of thrust in each one. It's hard to breathe. You got a 3G acceleration, and you hear this bang as you're separating from the tank, and you hear these 800-pound thrusters going off. It's like a cannon. It's a boom, boom, and it's shaking and vibrating, and you're in space, and it's quite a ride.
In the Space Shuttle's 20-year history, only now does it satisfy its original charter, to be a transport vehicle between Earth and an orbiting research facility. The International Space Station is the culmination of this program. Orbiting the globe 16 times a day, it serves as a platform for our return to the Moon and for the future manned exploration of Mars. When complete, it will be visible from nearly any point on Earth. And our children will never know a time when we did not live in space.
We're living in a time where the domain of the dreams are no longer relegated to the pages of science fiction books. We're living in a time where we can actually make that a reality.
We look behind the unopened door when we build a space station. We peer into this vast unknown, into this vast creation, and we understand both our significance and our insignificance, and that's what we want to do.
If we're not pushing the limits and going boldly where no one has gone before, we stagnate as a culture.
Life in zero gravity is a whole step of evolution. Can we have a baby in zero gravity? Will it develop properly? Or will it be a new organism at that point that perhaps can't return?
I see the space station as something that gives us hope that what we call our backyard is more than just our tiny little speck we call Earth. Our backyard is, in fact, the solar system. These are dreams that inspire children to become scientists, that inspire people to think beyond themselves.
We don't know what's out there, but history has taught us that what we find will be of much greater value than the things we thought we would find. And I can't imagine us as human beings turning our back on exploring.